Cowgirls. Welcome to another episode of Chef Stone Meets The Rock. Before we kick it off today, I'd like to thank Billy and his crew for lending us their beautiful modern kitchen here at 101 Limited in New Harbors. Today we're going to be working with ribs, barbecue style. This is going to be cowboy food. Okay, let's start off with a couple different types of ribs. Can you see these? These are short ribs. They come from the back of the pig underneath the tenderloin. These are beef ribs. These are huge. I'm going to show you a cooking technique that you can follow with beef ribs if you don't eat pork. You're going to have to adjust your cooking time because the size of the ribs are going to take a little longer. I'm going to put these away. Hope I'm not going too fast for you here. These are the ribs we're going to be working with. Okay? These are called spare ribs. I'm sure a lot of you have seen spare ribs before. This is a whole rack of spare ribs. Okay? I'm going to take some paper towel, give it a little bit of water, just to get it underneath my cutting board so it won't slide. I'm going to cut these into small portions because the pots we are going to use will only fit racks of about 3 or 4 ribs at a time. So to make life easy, we're going to go right into them and section them off, okay? Right into your pot. Couldn't be any more simple than that. So we're getting 4 nice sections of ribs out of this rack, okay? Try to keep your area clean. When you're working with pork, you want to make sure that you clean your area, keep your board, your knife, everything you use should be cleaned as you go. Trichinosis is a disease we don't want to catch. Okay? I'm going to cover the ribs with water. Just to barely cover. Okay? Give my hands a rinse. Now we're going to be making a poaching liquid. We're going to be using some Asian ingredients today. It's not just barbecue, this is going to be Asian barbecue, and they are going to be sesame crusted at the end. I'm going to use some honey, some soy sauce, Chinese 5-spice, which has this delicious aroma. Anything with 5-spice to me just brings the kitchen alive. And some powdered garlic, all right? It's going to be about 2 cups of soy sauce. I forgot to open that last time, didn't I? That's about 2 cups. And we're going to use just a tablespoon of the Chinese 5-spice because it's very powerful. I've got a teaspoon here. 3 teaspoons equals a tablespoon. So let's go in there with 1, 2, 3 level teaspoons, about a tablespoon, okay? Now we're going to go in with the honey. About 1 cup of honey should do it. I love honey. I love working with honey. Nothing's better than fresh honey. Okay, let's get that stove on. And once it's on, we're going to put the lid on and bring it to a boil. Once your ribs come to a boil, you want to bring it down to a simmer. Very low simmer. You want the bubbles to just barely be moving. You don't want to bring it to a rolling boil, or you don't want to keep the lid off or to the side because your ingredients are all going to evaporate. You want to just let it go at a very slow simmer. That's going to take about 30 minutes to cook. Okay, once our ribs start coming to a boil, you see a little movement in the water, we're going to add a cup of sugar. We don't want to add sugar too early on. We don't want it to become a little bit of a caramel. It does tend to caramelize. It'll spat onto the sides of the pot and crystallize around the edges. So we want to add it after you get a little bit of movement in your liquid. 1 cup of sugar, nice and even. Just sprinkle that around. Put your lid right back on. Okay, that's going to melt right in, and you're going to have a beautiful poaching liquid. That's going to go for about 30 minutes or until tender. I'll show you how to check that later. Now we're going to get our potatoes going because we're going to be serving caramelized onions, mashed potatoes with our ribs today, okay? I'm going to pull some potatoes out from the fridge that I've already cut and diced. Try to save a little time here. You can see those. I tend to use medium potatoes. okay? Nice and simple. Medium potatoes about the size of a fist, a little smaller, okay? Medium potato takes about 1 teaspoon of butter to a 1/4 cup of cream per potato. So I'm going to get these going. Put them right into your pot. Remember, when peeling and cutting potatoes, you want to keep them in cold water at all times. Stops them from browning. It's very simple. Let's get a stove on here. Select. And we're going to go on to a high heat. Get them to a rolling boil. We're going to turn them down after they start to boil because we don't want water spattering everywhere. Now while the potatoes are boiling, I'm going to cut some onions and we're going to make a caramelized onion. We're going to add the caramelized onions to the mashed potatoes at the end. If you add them too early, you'll end up giving a lot of color to the potato. You don't want brown mashed potatoes. That might look a little funny. Okay? I'm not going to use a masher today. I'm going to use a whip. So they're going to actually be caramelized onion whipped potatoes. Sounds fancy, right? Not very cowboy, but the ribs will take care of that. All right, let's get another flame here. I'm going to pull out some onions. All right. Very simple, medium onions. I like to use about 1/2 an onion to a 1/4 onion, depending on the size, per potato. So we have medium potato, 1/4 onion. Very oniony. If you don't like onions that much, don't use too much onion. If you're an onion lover, use a lot of onion, okay? So we're going to slice these up. Butter knife. Got a whisk for whipping. We're going to make whipped potatoes. Knife right here. We're going to be using butter and cream and salt and pepper. When I caramelize my onions, to finish them off, I like to use a little balsamic vinegar. Balsamic vinegar, when it reduces, it gets very thick. So balsamic vinegar reduction will add to the caramelization of the onions. When you caramelize onions, they tend to bring out their own natural sugars, but I'm going to add a little sugar into it anyway, just to add a little bit of sweetness. Okay, so these are my ingredients: milk, cream, butter, sugar, and onions. Let's get slicing. Did anyone ever tell you I had the fastest hands in the West? Would you like to see that? Still got all my fingers. All right, uh-oh. Try not to make a mess. Don't do this at home, kids. In fact, most knives that are professionally made are arched. You've got a bit of an arc. There's a reason for that. You want to work with the arc in a sawing motion, okay? Nice and easy. You don't have to be a professional on the first try. Keep your fingers at home like we keep them at work. All right, let's turn on our pan. Okay, so we make sure our stove is on nice and high. And we're going to set our pan down. While our pan gets hot, if you notice you get a little bit of movement in the water with the potatoes, you need to add a little salt. Okay? Just a little bit, maybe 1/2 teaspoon. Okay, a teaspoon. Just to add a little flavor. We're going to add more salt at the end, but you want to have a little salt in your cooking water while the potatoes are cooking. All right, as our pan starts to get hot, I've got my nice little oil and vinegar spout here. You can see it, okay? This is vinegar, here's some oil. Just about a tablespoon ought to do it. Okay, let's get that out of the way. Make sure you keep your area nice and clean. You want to mix your products, right? And when you start to see smoke rising out of the pan, that's when I gauge that the pan's hot enough to add my onions. If you don't hear anything when you add your onions in, you know for next time to wait a little longer. You want to hear a good hissing sound from your pan, okay? Looks hot enough to me. Let's give it a try. Can you hear that at home? All right. Pull out a little spoon. I'm just going to spread them out a little bit. If you have a large pan, you might as well spread them out and get as much of the surface area covered as possible. The less surface area you have covered, the longer it's going to take for your onions to cook. Okay? So we now have our ribs that are nice coming to a slow boil. We've got potatoes working for our caramelized onion potatoes, and the onions which are going to get added to the potatoes after they're cooked. Now we've got our ribs in our poaching liquid. Potatoes are coming up to a boil nicely. And we've got some sliced onions here that we're sauteing to caramelize for our potatoes. Why don't I take this time now to make some barbecue sauce? Now, there's a million different ways you can make barbecue sauce. So you have to make yourself happy. Do you like it sweet? Do you like it spicy? Do you like a bit of Asian flair? That's how I like it. We're gonna do a bit of an Asian flair today. I'm gonna be adding some sesame oil and a little bit of Chinese 5-spice to my barbecue sauce, just for a little bit of flair. I'm gonna take about 2 cups of ketchup, about a tablespoon of honey, good pinch of garlic powder. Garlic powder is what gives the predominant flavor in the barbecue sauce. Generally, when I make sauces, it's the same with stews and soups. They need to sit overnight. The term we use in professional kitchens is called marrying, like the girl's name Mary. Flavors need to come together overnight and marry. So when you make your barbecue sauce, if you're planning ahead, try and make it the night before. It's going to taste much better the next day, I promise. I'm going to give a few shakes of Worcestershire sauce. It's called 4. And I like it spicy, so I go a little extra heavy with my Tabasco. Let's call that about 10 shakes. If you don't like spicy food, take it easy with Tabasco. It's strong and it will get hotter the next day. I'm going to give that a light whisk. And that's it. Asian flair comes from the sesame oil and the soy sauce, which we're going to add at the end. Make sure it gets well incorporated. You don't want bits of granulated garlic getting in your mouth later on. Get caught in your teeth, no good. A couple of shakes of sesame oil. Soy sauce is very salty, so you just want to put a little bit. A little dab will do you. Don't go heavy on the soy sauce. Okay? That's it. That's my barbecue sauce the way I like it. Bit of Asian flair. Very simple. Okay? Check on our onions here. Anyone see them nicely browning? Can we get that on the screen here? All right. You see how they're starting to brown? When the onions start to get this color, start to brown, we're going to add a little balsamic vinegar to it. All right? That's the right one. No. About a tablespoon of balsamic vinegar should be more than enough. There we go. Now the balsamic vinegar is going to reduce and get thick. It's going to add color and natural sugars to the caramelized onions, which will release their own sugars as they cook. I'm going to give the onions a little stir. Remember, if you're using a very large pan, this is going to reduce quickly. So you got to keep your eye on it. This is not the time to go playing with the barbecue sauce. You don't want this to burn. So it's going to reduce fast because of the large surface area we're working with. Okay, let's give it a pinch of salt, which helps bring out the natural flavors of all food. We always want to put a pinch of salt in everything. Even when you're baking at home, if you're making a cake, if you notice, most recipes, pinch of salt even in a cake. Why? Brings out all the natural flavors, brings them together. You can use any pepper that you like. I prefer to use fresh pepper when I'm cooking. And I make sure my cooks at the restaurant do too. Fresh pepper always tastes better. Another stir. Can you see how we're getting a nice color here now? It's starting to reduce. The onions are wilting. Can we see the color we're getting here? This is what I was talking about earlier. We don't want to have too much color in the potatoes. That's why we're going to add this at the very end. After we mash the potatoes, we're going to fold in the caramelized onions. Because if we mash them in, you'd end up with the brown potatoes that we don't want. After about a half an hour of poaching, the ribs should be really soft and tender. I'm going to show you how I check them at the restaurant at Evie's. You can check them at home with your fingers if you've got tough fingers. I tend to just use a toothpick. It's very simple. Press the toothpick into the meat. If it goes in and comes out easily, the ribs are ready to be baked in the oven, okay? I'm going to use tin foil today just to make life easier so when I clean later on, I won't have to be scraping any caramelization of the sauce off the pan. All right? Can you smell that at home? Chinese 5-spice. I love this stuff. Let's pull one out. All right. You see the nice, dark, rich color we've got going here? Can you guys see that at home? All right. And take my toothpick and just press it in. See how easily that went in? If you don't have to force the toothpick in and it comes right out, ribs are done. So I'm going to turn these off. Okay. So let's get all our ribs lined up, ready for basting with our barbecue sauce. Now, just for a bit of flair at Evie's, I've been doing sesame crusted. And what that means is, technically in American cooking, where barbecuing is all famous, we use what's called bark. After you've glazed your ribs and baked them, whatever you crust them with, it can be a fennel seed, a poppy seed. After they bake, there's actually what looks like a tree bark that you can peel off. When that bark is nice and crusty, that's how you know your ribs are done in the oven. So I'm gonna add my sesame crust and my barbecue sauce. Got my brush here. Can you guys see this? All right. And glaze the ribs with the barbecue sauce. Do try to let your barbecue sauce sit overnight. It will taste better, I promise. I'm going with this right away now because we're in TV land. But if you let it sit overnight, you will notice the difference. Like I said earlier, same with soups and stews. Everything tends to taste better after flavors have a chance to marry. Don't be shy. Prepare your food ahead. Leaves your kitchen cleaner. Guests come in. There's less work for you to do, less cleanup, there's less mess. Prepare things in advance when you can. So something like this can be done the night before without any difficulty. Look at this beautiful sheen we've got going here on these ribs. They're almost just as good without the sesame seeds. But that little bit of extra flair, that's where I come from, that's what I do. Cowboys would never go and put sesame seeds on their ribs, but I'm going to, because I'm a cowboy, but I'm from New York. So this ends up being a little bit of an Asian flair, like I said earlier. We've got the soy sauce in there, we've got the sesame oil in there. Why not go all the way? Let's take it to the next level. Sprinkle, be generous. Like I said earlier, if you're not a sesame seed fan, crust with whatever you like. You don't even have to use any seeds. Pick a seed. Poppy seeds look very dark, fennel are very green. I like a liberal sprinkling. I'm a big sesame crusted kind of guy. Okay. Now we're gonna go in the oven at about 220 degrees Celsius, only for about 5 to 7 minutes. But you really wanna see that crust. You'll see a bark forming. The skin is gonna start to ripple on top. The sheen's gonna be gone. You're gonna have a nice glaze. You'll see what I mean in a minute. Okay, while the ribs are in, our onions are now caramelized. Can we get a look at the caramelized onions? They're nice and golden brown. So you want to turn them off at this point. We don't want them to get any darker than that. A burnt flavor is very bitter. You don't want a bitter flavor in your potatoes, okay? All right, don't try this at home. Little tricks. They look perfect. I'm gonna actually take them off. Okay, caramelized onions are ready. Ribs are in. Now what we're gonna do is finish off our potatoes. They're just coming to a boil now. Now potatoes tend to get waterlogged if you cook them too long. You don't want waterlogged potatoes. They taste like box potatoes, like from powder. So you need to test them every once in a while. Let's pull one out and give it a check. Nope, I can tell they're still hard. You're gonna need another couple of minutes. But from the boiling point, you only need to cook potatoes 5 to 7 minutes. You wanna make sure when you're cutting potatoes, they're all the same size. Even distribution of heat and the same size on potatoes is very important. If one potato's large and one's small, the smaller one's gonna take longer to cook and you're gonna end up with that waterlogged taste. You don't want waterlogged potatoes. So cut them all the same size, start them in cold water, add a little bit of salt. When they come to the boil, 5 to 7 minutes. I've got my strainer ready over my sink. Put away my sesame seeds, keep the clutter to a minimum. Don't need the toothpicks anymore. Now I've got whole cream, butter, salt, and pepper. This is all the ingredients I'm gonna use, plus the caramelized onions to add to my potatoes. Couldn't be more simple than that. Okay, I'm gonna give our potatoes a check here. Ooh, I can tell they're done, they're getting soft. Let's see. When a knife passes through very easily without putting any pressure on, they're done. Look at that, nice and easy, but they're still staying whole. If they were to just start to crumble and fall apart, that would be my key to know that they're getting a little waterlogged. All right, so we're just gonna strain off the water. And go right back into the pan. You need to turn the heat down just slightly. You don't want the cream to burn on the bottom of your pan. So we're gonna turn the heat down. Okay. Now, these are whipped potatoes, so I'm not gonna use a masher, I'm gonna use a whip. I'm basically mashing, but I'm using a whip. And it's gonna be easier once we add the cream and the butter. I like to use about a teaspoon of butter per medium potato. So 3 teaspoons equals a tablespoon. We've got 6 potatoes, so we're gonna use how much butter? How much cream? About 3 tablespoons of butter should do it. Okay? Now if you like buttery potatoes, add more butter. If you're health conscious, use margarine. It's not a problem. Add about 1 cup of cream to start. You can always add more. You can't take it out once you've added it. So add a little bit at a time, taste as you go. A little salt, young fresh pepper. I like to add a little bit of everything as I go. I taste as I cook. I think everyone should do that. Add a little bit at a time, and if you like a certain flavor, go with it. If you like salty, add more salt. It's not a problem. I don't generally follow recipes to a T. I go to taste. Okay, so I'm gonna just mash my potatoes here a little bit, then I'm gonna get into my whisking action, okay? Can you see me whipping my potatoes? That's what makes these a little different. Caramelized onion, whipped potatoes. All right. Now, after you've gotten most of the lumps out, we can add our onions. Go right in. Caramelized onion, whipped potatoes. Very simple. I didn't do anything crazy, right? Let's get a whisk out. This is called folding. Usually it's a J movement. You start at 12 o'clock at the top of your pan and bring it into a J form. See how the potatoes are a little hard? We're gonna add a little bit more cream. That's why it's difficult to follow a recipe. You can see as you're going what you need to do. Something's a little stiff, you want to weaken it up, add a little bit more cream. It's not a problem. All right, let's continue folding. Now, I worked in one restaurant in New York. The chef liked me to add extra virgin olive oil. He liked his potatoes oily. It's not for everyone. Let's give it a taste. A little bit more salt. Other than that, perfect. Okay, remember the folding technique. It's a J. Start at 12 o'clock and come around. If you were folding egg whites into something and you wanted them to rise, if you were making a souffle, this is the J fold. We're folding. Let's check our ribs. Potatoes are done. Wow. Hot stuff coming through. Now this is where I should be able to say, can I get a yee-haw? Look at that. Yeah. Thank you. Now that's cowboy cooking. All right. We've already tested for doneness. Look, see how they wobble? Can you see that? See how easy they move? That's a done rib. All right, let's get a plate. There we go. Let's get a knife. See how easy you can cut through them? Can you see that on TV here? Let me move the potato out of the way. Look how easily my knife goes through. Look at that. The bone just fell out. That's gonna be delicious. I'm hungry. All right, 3 ribs. Sesame crusted. Spotted potato. Look at that. Rustic style. Let's give it a bit of a garnish. Now, everyone knows at this point I like to keep my herbs in nice cold water, keep them vibrant and green. Here's a basil leaf, fresh basil. I love fresh basil. Look how pretty that looks. Nice and simple, easy garnish, no fuss, no muss. Gonna add a little bit more sesame seeds to the plate. Just around the edge, a little garlic, whatever you have that you want to garnish your plate with, it's fine. Look how easy that is. How about a squeeze bottle? Believe I have a squeeze bottle of sauce here somewhere. At the restaurant, I try to go a little over the top. I always try to make everything look as nice as possible. I'm a big crispy person. I like to put something crispy on everything. As you saw last week on the apple tart, a little crispy chip on top. That's just the way I am. I like crispy things. So let's give it a little bit of pizzazz here. Okay, now we're getting restaurant style. Magic cupboard. What's in the magic cupboard? Crispy onions. These are a little bit difficult to make at home. I like using my Silpats. Can you see these at home? Crispy onions. Stick them right in your potatoes. Look at that. Garnished. Okay? Sesame crusted spare ribs, barbecue sauce, caramelized whipped potatoes. Now, how was that for cowboy cooking? Serious barbecue going on here in Gibraltar. Why don't you join us next week, same time, same channel. Be there. There's a new sheriff in town, and I'm cooking it up cowboy.